I've been researching organic growth for several years, and beginning in 2002 after the Enron debacle, I became very interested in how many public companies were engaged in the games that Enron was engaged in, because I thought Enron was an aberration. And after a lot of work with a lot of help from research assistants and faculty colleagues, I built a financial model called the Organic Growth Index, which takes all the public numbers filed with the SEC of public companies and tries to basically evaluate those numbers and illuminate which public companies are creating substantial value, outperforming their industry competition, but doing it primarily organically. So I set up a model that basically had screens, that you had to pass screens. And I tried to find companies that it was likely that they were playing accounting games and kick them out. Companies that had a lot of earnings that weren't, cash flow earnings. If there was a big discrepancy, I kicked them out. If companies were basically growing their receivables far greater than their sales, that was evidence that something was going on. And I also wanted to kick out companies that were primarily serial acquirers that were basically buying most of their income. And the results of those financial models, and we published a 10-year study here at the Batten Institute using that model, that basically fewer than 7% of the public companies are able to grow and create value and outcompete the competition and do it primarily organically. Well, that set me off on basically the search for why were these companies able to do this. And this led to other research projects, and that led to my second book on organic growth, The Road to Organic Growth. Well, in looking at that, I sat back and said, this whole thing going on in the public markets with quarterly earnings and short-term mentality and dealing with so many executive education clients here at Darden, and it just was hitting me, wow. A lot of this quarterly earnings pressure and short-termism and making my quarterly numbers really inhibits growth and innovation, because growth and innovation is not a short-term thing. You can't predict it. It doesn't happen in a linear manner. And I sat back and said, I was on Wall Street as an investment banker. I was a strategy consultant before coming to academia. What did I think about growth? And I said, well, you grow or die. All businesses grow or die. Yeah. You should be a continuous high growth company. Growth is always good. Bigger is always better. And I sat back and said, I wonder what the empirical basis of those rules are, those beliefs. And so I set out in my new book, Smart Growth, to find the empirical scientific basis for the growth mental model. And what I found, I went to the fields of economics, biology, every management field, all right? What I found, there is no empirical scientific basis for any of those rules. They are fiction. They are not true. Growth is not always good. Bigger is not always better. Companies do not grow in a continuous linear manner. And companies do not grow or die. In fact, if you have too ambitious of growth plans and have what I call ever-increasing, big, hairy, audacious goals, stretch goals, you can stress your company, your people, your processes, and it's just as likely it would be grow and die. Growth creates risk. And the purpose of the Smart Growth book was to basically put out and to change the conversation about growth in the business world. Let's view growth realistically. Smart growth is not anti-growth. Smart growth is realistic growth. We need to basically understand that if growth can do the following, it can stress our people, stress our culture, growth can stress quality controls, it can stress financial controls, it can dilute the customer value proposition, it can dilute the brand. Toyota's a perfect example of that, the story that's going on now by Toyota. Starbucks, another perfect example of that, all right? You can look at Harley Davidson, and there are others, all right? And so smart growth introduces the concept that growth is a complex experimental learning process that needs to be managed. It also brings to bear the other research which says that in order to be a high organic growth company consistently, you need high employee engagement and you need customer centricity. And the book puts forth all the research as to what does that mean with high employee engagement, with some Darden cases on companies that have been able to achieve this. So the Smart Growth book, with the subtitle, Building an Enduring Business by Managing the Risk of Growth, says we need job creation in this company. We need more national competitiveness. We need more real growth and innovation. We need to be realistic about growth. We need to basically get rid of short-termism. We need to get rid of the public market pressures to grow continuously and understand that good companies do not do that. You can look at Procter & Gamble as a perfect example. And let's reward companies for producing real growth and understand, all right, that real growth takes time and takes an experimental process, which means it's not predictable in a linear fashion. And what's fascinating about the Smart Growth book, I found that economics, the field of economics, does not model business growth that well. What was so fascinating was biology is a far better modeler of growth than economics. And I put forth in the book basically a whole summary of biological findings and complex adaptive systems on growth. And one that's fascinating is that when you grow, nobody ever thinks about this. The bigger you get, you put yourself in a different competitive space. And you could find yourself facing better capitalized and better competition as you go up the competitive space food chain. Maybe a company shouldn't get any bigger than $1 billion or $100 million to have its niche. And that's an interesting point that needs to basically be made in the marketplace. So, Smart Growth tries to bring to bear all the research on growth and put forth an alternative model and rejects the growth mental model that is used by Wall Street and that is accepted by most CEOs and boards in order to comply with Wall Street's dictums.